The Bondells were a happy family. Even though they often argued about small things, they became friends again soon. Mr. Bondell was a businessman who stopped working after saving enough money to live quietly. He rented a small house in Saint-Germain and lived there with his wife. He was a quiet man with strong opinions. He had some education and read serious newspapers, but he also liked funny jokes. He had a logical mind and good common sense. He did not think a lot, but when he did, he thought clearly and made decisions after thinking carefully. He was of medium height, looked good, and was starting to get gray hair. His wife had many good qualities, but also some bad ones. She had a quick temper and was very honest, sometimes too much. She could stay angry for a long time. She used to be pretty but had become too fat and too red. However, in their neighborhood in Saint-Germain, people still thought she was a very beautiful woman who was healthy but had a bad temper. Their arguments almost always started at breakfast over small things and often lasted all day or even until the next day. Their simple and common life made small things seem important, and every conversation could turn into an argument. This was not the case when they were busy with business, which brought them closer and gave them common interests. But in Saint-Germain, they saw fewer people. They had to make new friends and build a new life among strangers, a new life with nothing to do. The boredom of being alone made them both a little bitter, and the quiet happiness they hoped for when they became rich did not come. One June morning, just as they were sitting down to breakfast, Mr. Bondell asked, "Do you know the people who live in the little red house at the end of Rue Duberceau?" Mrs. Bondell was in a bad mood. She answered, "Yes and no. I know them, but I do not want to be friends with them." "Why not? They seem to be very nice." "Because this morning I met the husband on the terrace, and we took a little walk together." Seeing that there might be trouble, Mr. Bondell added, "He talked to me first." His wife looked at him angrily. She said, "You should have avoided him." "Why?" "Because there are rumors about them." "What kind of rumors?" "Oh, rumors like you often hear." Mr. Bondell, sadly, got a bit angry. He said, "My dear, you know I hate gossip. As for those people, I find them very nice." She asked angrily, "The wife too?" "Yes, though I have barely seen her." The argument got hotter because they had nothing else to talk about. Mrs. Bondell refused to say what she heard about these neighbors, hinting at things without saying them. Mr. Bondell shrugged his shoulders, smiled, and made his wife angrier. She finally shouted, "Well, that man is fooled by his wife there." Mr. Bondell answered calmly, "I don't see how that affects a man's honor." She seemed shocked. "What? You don't see? You don't see? Well, that's too much. You don't see. It's a public scandal. He is disgraced." He answered, "Ah, not at all. Should a man be disgraced because he is deceived, because he is betrayed or robbed? No, indeed. Maybe that is true for the wife, but not for him." She became very angry, shouting, "For him as well as for her. They are both disgraced. It's a public shame." Mr. Bondell, very calm, asked, "First of all, is it true? Who can say it is true if no one has caught them in the act?" Mrs. Bondell was getting worried. She snapped, "What? Who can say it? Why, everybody. Everybody. It's as clear as the nose on your face. Everybody knows it and talks about it. There is no doubt." He was smiling. For a long time, people thought the sun moved around the earth. This man loves his wife and speaks of her kindly and respectfully. This whole thing is just lies. Stamping her foot, she stuttered, "Do you think that fool, that idiot, knows anything about it?" Mr. Bondell did not get angry. He spoke clearly. "Excuse me. This gentleman is not a fool. He seemed very smart and clever to me. And you can't make me believe that a smart man doesn't notice such a thing in his own house, while the neighbors, who are not there, know every detail of this affair. For I'll bet they know everything." Mrs. Bondell had a fit of angry laughter, which irritated her husband. She laughed, "Ha! Ah! Ah! They are all the same. There's not a man alive who could discover such a thing unless it was right in front of his face." The argument was now going to other topics. She was shouting about how husbands don't see when they are being tricked, which he didn't believe, and she said it with such contempt that he finally got angry. Then the argument became a real fight, where she took the side of the women and he defended the men. He proudly said, "Well, I swear that if I had ever been tricked, I would have noticed it right away, and I would have made sure you never wanted to do such things again, so much that it would take more than one doctor to fix you." Boiling with anger, she shouted, You're as big a fool as the others, do you hear?" He still insisted, "I can swear to you that I am not." She laughed so rudely that he felt his heart beat fast and a chill run down his back. "For the third time," he said, "I would have seen it." She stood up, still laughing the same way. She slammed the door and left the room, saying, "Well, if that isn't too much." Mr. Bondell stayed alone, feeling bad. That rude, provoking laugh had hurt him deeply. He went outside, walked, and thought. The loneliness of his new life made him sad and gloomy. The neighbor, whom he had met that morning, came to him with open hands. They continued their walk together. After talking about different things, they started to talk about their wives. Both seemed to have something to share, something unclear, about these women who were part of their lives. The neighbor was saying, "Really, sometimes, it seems like they dislike their husband just because he is their husband. I love my wife. I love her very much. I appreciate and respect her. Well, there are times when she seems to trust our friends more than me." Mr. Bondell immediately thought, "There is no doubt. My wife was right." When he left this man, he began to think again. He felt a strange mix of different ideas in his mind, a kind of burning inside. That mocking, rude laugh kept ringing in his ears and seemed to say, "Why? You are just like the others, you fool." This was just bravado. One of those rude things a woman says when she dares everything, risks everything, to hurt and shame the man who has made her angry. This poor man must also be one of those cheated husbands, like so many others. He had said sadly, "There are times when she seems to trust our friends more than me." That is how a husband talks about his wife's special attention to another man. That was all. He had seen nothing more. He was like the rest, all the rest. And how strangely Mr. Bondell's own wife had laughed when she said, you too." How wild and careless these women are who can make a man suspicious just to get revenge. He thought about their whole life since their marriage, reviewed their friends, to see if she had ever shown more trust in anyone else than in him. He had never suspected anyone. He was so calm, so sure of her, so confident. But now he remembered she had a friend, a close friend, who had dined with them 3 times a week for almost a year. Tancred, good old Tancred, whom Mr. Bondell loved like a brother and still met secretly, since his wife, for some reason, had grown angry with him. He stopped to think, looking at the past with worried eyes. Then he got angry at himself for having such shameful doubts, for being jealous. He blamed himself when he remembered the visits and the behavior of this friend whom his wife had sent away for no clear reason. But suddenly, other memories came back, similar fights caused by the vengeful nature of Mrs. Bondell, who never forgave a slight. Then he laughed at himself for doubting. He remembered his wife's angry looks when he told her at night, "I saw good old Tancred, and he sends his regards to you," and he felt better. She would always answer, "When you see that gentleman, tell him I don't need his regards." She would say these words with an irritated, angry look. You could tell she did not forgive, and he had suspected her even for a second? Such foolishness! But why was she so angry? She never gave the exact reason for this fight. She still held that grudge. Was it? But no, no. And Mr. Bondell told himself he was lowering himself by even thinking of such things. Yes, he was definitely lowering himself, but he could not stop thinking about it. He asked himself with fear if this thought had come to stay, if it would grow into a terrible worry. He knew himself. He was a man who would think over his doubts, just like he used to think over his business deals, for days and nights, always weighing the good and bad sides. He was already getting excited. He was walking fast and losing his calmness. A thought cannot be stopped. It cannot be caught or killed. Suddenly, he had an idea. It was bold. So bold that at first he wasn't sure if he could do it. Every time he met Tancred, his friend would ask about Mrs. Bondell, and Mr. Bondell would answer, "She is still a little angry. Nothing more." Good Lord, what a fool he had been. Maybe. Well, he would take the train to Paris, go to Tancred, and bring him back with him that very evening, telling him that his wife's mysterious anger had disappeared. But how would Mrs. Bondell act? What a scene there would be! What anger! What scandal! What of it? That would be revenge. When she saw him unexpectedly, he should be able to see the truth in their faces. He immediately went to the station, bought his ticket, got on the train, and as soon as he felt the train moving, he felt fear, a kind of dizziness at what he was going to do. To not back down and return alone, he tried not to think about it, to focus on other things, to do what he had decided with determination. And he began to hum tunes from operettas and music halls until he reached Paris. As soon as he was walking along the streets that led to Tancred's, he felt like stopping. He paused in front of several shops, noticed the prices of things, was interested in new things, felt like having a glass of beer, which he usually didn't do. And as he got closer to his friend's place, he really hoped not to meet him. But Tancred was at home, alone, reading. He jumped up in surprise, saying, "Ah, Bondell, what luck! Mr. Bondell, feeling awkward, answered, "Yes, my dear friend. I happen to be in Paris, and I thought I'd drop in and shake hands with you." "That's very nice, very nice. Especially since you haven't visited me very often lately." "Well, you see, even when you don't want to, you are often influenced by the people around you, and as my wife seemed to dislike you."
Joba.
"Seemed, she did more than that. She showed me the door." "What was the reason? I never heard it." "Oh, nothing at all. A small argument where we did not agree." "But what was the argument about?" "A lady I know. You may know her by name, Madame Bouton." "Ah, really? Well, I think my wife has forgotten her grudge, because this morning she spoke of you in very pleasant terms." Tancred started, and seemed so surprised that for a few minutes he could not say anything. Then he asked, "She spoke of me in pleasant terms?" "Yes." "You are sure?" "Of course I am. I am not dreaming." "And then?" "And then, as I was coming to Paris, I thought that I would make you happy by telling you the good news." "Why, yes, why, yes." Bondell seemed to hesitate. Then, after a short pause, he added, "I even had an idea." "What is it?" "To take you back home with me to dinner." Tancred, who was naturally careful, seemed a little worried by this idea, and he asked, "Oh, really? Is it possible? Are we not risking a scene?" "No, no, indeed. Because, you know, Madame Bondell holds grudges for a long time." "Yes, but I can assure you that she no longer holds any grudge against you. I am even convinced that it will be a great surprise for her to see you suddenly." "Really?" "Yes, really." "Well then, let's go. I am happy. You see, this misunderstanding was very unpleasant for me." They set out together toward the Saint Lazare station, arm in arm. They made the trip in silence. Both seemed deep in thought. Seated in the train car, one opposite the other, they looked at each other without speaking, each noticing that the other was pale. Then they left the train and once more linked arms as if to face some common danger together. After a few minutes of walking, they stopped, a little out of breath, in front of Bondell's house. Bondell led his friend into the living room, called the servant, and asked, "Is Madame at home?" "Yes, sir." "Please ask her to come down at once." They sat down in two armchairs and waited. Both wanted to leave before seeing the much-feared person. A familiar, heavy step could be heard coming down the stairs. A hand moved the knob, and both men watched the handle turn. Then the door opened wide, and Madame Bondell stopped and looked to see who was there before entering. She looked, blushed, trembled, stepped back, then stood still, her cheeks red and her hands resting against the sides of the door frame. Tancred, as pale as if about to faint, had stood up, dropping his hat, which rolled along the floor. He stammered, "Mon Dieu, madame, it is I thought, I dared, I was so sorry." As she did not answer, he continued, "Will you forgive me?" Then, quickly, moved by some impulse, she walked toward him with her hands outstretched. And when he had taken, pressed, and held these two hands, she said, in a trembling, weak little voice, which was new to her husband, "Ah, my dear friend, how happy I am." And Bondell, who was watching them, felt an icy chill run over him, as if he had been dipped in a cold bath.